Hello, I'm Kimberly Dondo, Digital Content Manager, and welcome to In Conversation With, the podcast series that delves into the world of financial services and brings you face to face with some of the most notable figures in the industry. Listen as we discuss topics that are currently facing the industry and hear from visionary CEOs to disruptive innovators as we bring you a diverse array of voices and perspectives. We'll explore the challenges they faced, the lessons they've learned, and the insights they have to share about the ever-evolving landscape of financial services. Hello and welcome to In Conversation With. I'm Kimberly Dondo, Digital Content Manager, and in today's episode, I'm joined by Dr. Louis Williams, Head of Behavioural Insights and Psychology at Dynamic Planner. Hi, Louis. Thank you for joining me.
No problem. Thank you for inviting me.
I don't know if you want me to call you doctor the whole time, but...
No, not at all. No, Louis is fine, please.
Okay, perfect. So could you give us a bit more of a background into yourself and how you got started in financial services?
Yeah, sure. So, my background is more in experimental psychology. So I studied psychology at undergrad level, and then I went through to completing my PhD. And I was involved in lots of different research, mainly using eye tracking measurements, actually techniques to look at how people look at different information, look at artworks, look at graphs. And after being at university and teaching for a couple of years, I then found this project between Dynamic Planner, where I work now, and I'm the head of psychology, and the University of Reading, where I also work at the moment. I have a visiting fellowship there. And this project was for us to try to see how we can, create some new tools and measurements to understand more about clients and their behaviors and their emotions and their personalities. So I decided to go for it. It was a 2-year kind of postdoc position. And after completing that, then, I joined Dynamic Planner permanently. So, I'm now the head of psychology there. Yeah.
Fantastic. And this area is very interesting to me. So I guess my first question to you would be, how does behavioral psychology play a role in shaping clients' financial decisions?
Yeah, so I mean, many fields in psychology is very relevant when we think about our industry, and particularly, when you think about clients making decisions, not only clients, just general, financial decisions we may make in the supermarket. Psychology really has a strong impact. And I think if we think more about kind of behavioral and cognitive psychology, one of the issues is that, nowadays there's so many options out there for us to purchase, so much information, and we have limited time to make decisions. So all of this information and all of the sources of information, families and friends telling you something, your advisor, social media, that we are humans, we don't have the capacity to take all of this information and always make the best choice, the most optimal choice. And so that is one of the issues, and one of how theories in psychology really explains kind of this decision-making process is that because of this, we just have to sometimes simplify it, and we just have to use different strategies, different heuristics, we call them. For example, if you're in the supermarket and you only have 2 items to choose from, you might decide to look at all of that information that you can compare, the price, the calories, the ingredients. But suddenly, if there's lots of items and you've got 2 minutes before you can leave, or you need to leave, then suddenly you might just base your decision on the price. So your decision-making process can really change, and that obviously has impact on your financial decisions and what you choose and how you feel after you've made that choice. And so, psychology in that sense is really, really important for us to understand how it works, because those decisions and those shortcuts is what leads to a lot of the biases that we talk about. So these errors that we make, these cognitive errors, we make them because we're trying to, to reduce the decision-making process into more of a simplified experience. And so, that's how psychology is really relevant for our clients and for all of us on a day-to-day life.
Yeah. And picking up on that point that you made about biases, what are some that are quite common that financial advisors can be or should be made aware of?
Yeah, so there are obviously many out there that we always talk about. I think in terms of today's society, what people are probably thinking about most, with the cost of living crisis and, interest rates, mortgage rates. I think the availability bias is one of the important ones for advisors to think about. So this is all about how I may base my decisions on information that comes to my mind quickly or comes to my mind easily. And so again, this might happen a lot, in the supermarket situation where I pick up a product and the price shocks me. And it shocks me because I remember what it was last week, something that I recently purchased, or I purchase it, every week. And because it's suddenly gone up £1 or so, this then influences my decision. It influences my views, my general views on inflation and on the state of the economy. So that's quite an interesting and I think important bias for advisors to think about. And availability bias relates quite nicely to recency bias, which is where, because of what's happening now or recently, I think that's also what's going to happen in the future. Right. And so I may not want to make decisions about my mortgage and things because or because of what I've seen in the markets, because I have a feeling this is also going to be the same, in 10 years, 20 years time. And so because of what's happening right now, it affects what I may think about that may happen in the future. So I think those are two that, pretty important in terms of cost of living crisis, in terms of what advisors could think about today, which also could link nicely to the anchoring bias as well, where because there might be a value or some pre-existing information that I'm fixated on, I might use that, and that might influence my views and my decisions when the next thing happens. So, for example, my portfolio value last year, when I discussed with my advisor, had a meeting with my advisor, I might be fixated on that value, that when I see it again this year, I'm anchored to that it might affect how I feel, my optimism about the future. So I think those biases are quite relevant to think about today.
It's so interesting to me how all of those things kind of tie in together, and you've used some examples there that can kind of bring more light to those biases. But can you give any other examples of how applying behavioral insights can lead to a better outcome for clients?
Yes. So if we take that anchoring bias, for example, so I mentioned that I used to do a lot of research, eye tracking research before I joined Dynamo. I still am doing it actually at the moment. So one of the studies we ran, it was actually with a meteorology department, so nothing to do with financial advice, but we were showing forecasts to participants. So weather forecasts. And what we found is when we were tracking how people were looking at these forecasts, we found actually that when a forecast had a median line showing, what to plan for, the people were actually fixating a lot to this line, even when the questions we asked them were not very relevant to using that median line so much. So as if people were anchoring to this median line, even though they didn't need to. And when we removed that line and showed them exact same forecast, you can see that they went around the graph a lot more. They tried to look at the y-axis, and the spread of the eye movements was a lot greater because they no longer had that. And so practically, one thing that we've now, that was something we published recently, and now we've actually applied that to what we do in Dynamic Planner, where our cash flow forecast, where it shows the median line, it shows the 25th and the percentiles, the 95th percentiles. We also now have a button where you can suddenly show all of the runs that go beneath that. So the client can actually really see the volatility, the ups and downs, and they're not necessarily going to anchor only to that median line. And you can then also have share the story of, although you may end up somewhere there, it may not be such a nice path and a nice journey that it may look like when you look at that median line. So I think this type of techniques, using these types of experiments and psychological techniques, we can then apply them and apply the results and the findings into our industry. Even though this study was nothing to do with financial advice, we can still learn from this research.
Yeah. That's so interesting to me that something as small as a median line could kind of draw someone's attention, but I can see how that could happen, and making those small changes can probably be a massive benefit for advisors trying to explain things to their clients. So yeah, that's very interesting.
Yeah, especially if people are not experts as well. So they don't know about, they don't understand graphs very well. They don't know about the numbers that are beneath that. So they might just rely on parts of the graph that feel familiar to them. So yeah, it's important. Yeah.
And how can financial advisors effectively communicate with their clients to kind of address any of their behavioral biases?
Yes. So, something that's very difficult, because as much as we know about the behavioral biases that exist, we can still fall into these traps. Even though I can list 10 off now, that doesn't mean I'm I'm someone who doesn't fall into that myself. And so we can educate clients. I think we can tell them more about the biases, but I think we should also use approaches which allows them to maybe experience some of the investment journey and make decisions, and maybe through like a gamified type of approach. And when they do that, and when we can notify them on some of the biases they may have, experienced, or how they may have behaved. So, for example, they may have ended up following how another individual, had reacted during the game. What we shouldn't do is use that behavior and then assume that is how the client's going to act in reality. We shouldn't necessarily do that, but I think that can give us a nice way for the client to go through different periods of volatility and things, and go through these experiences and understand what they did and why it maybe wasn't the best action that they could have taken during that time. So I think that could be a useful way for advisors to educate clients more about behavioral biases.
Yeah. And also, on top of that, right now we're at a point where there's volatility and market volatility a lot. And what strategies would you impart to advisors to help their clients stay disciplined and not listen to the noise and give in to any trepidation they might have when it comes to market volatility?
Yeah, so we did some research into this actually to see what factors were really impacting and influencing people and their reactions during market volatility. And so it was interesting because we found that there were kind of four main factors and kind of characteristics that influenced how people reacted. And two of the most important ones was someone's financial self-efficacy. So this is your actual confidence that you have in your abilities to manage your finances. And the second one was your resilience, not only your resilience in terms of having knowledge and resources and a support network around you to help you, but also having the emotional resilience to bounce back from difficult periods, to adapt, to be more optimistic. And so what we find is that if clients and if advisors are able to educate clients and help them build their confidence in their abilities to manage their finance, help them build their resilience, that when they do face these periods, they're not going to be necessarily fazed by this. They're not going to be panicking. And actually, I had a number of interviews during COVID with advisors, and many of them said that because they had started to communicate with clients way before 2020, back in 2018 or prior to that, that communicate more about volatility and what they found is that when it then happened, when it then occurred and they went through these difficult experiences, they expected it and they were fine and they weren't panicking. So I think being able to prepare people and build their resilience and confidence is something advisors should do. And obviously they can do that through many ways, through kind of having conversations about letting go of certainty and focusing on what they can control and things like that, as well as more practical ways like listing things that are like anxious behaviors that they may actually engage in, and listing them and reflecting on those things, and reflecting when things went well in the past and what maybe you did that wasn't so useful and what you could do next time. I think taking time out and having those conversations, or even not having conversations with clients, sometimes not making them make decisions because they're emotionally charged and they're maybe not at the right, don't have the right frame of mind to make a decision right now. So yeah, I think advisors could think about when they have conversations, how they have them, and really help them build their confidence and resilience ultimately to deal with those situations.
Yeah. I think it's a lot about understanding your clients' behaviors and any anxieties that they may carry. So, can you go a little bit more into depth about how understanding clients' behavioral tendencies can help advisors kind of tailor their investment recommendations?
Yeah, so obviously through dynamic planning and what we do, part of our system is to profile clients, particularly looking at their attitudes to risk and their sustainability preferences. And now we're adding in vulnerability assessments as well. And so if we think about the attitude to risk questionnaire, a lot of those behavioral elements are kind of embedded within some of our questions, our psychometric items. And so we're trying to allow the advisor to get some insight into some of these characteristics, as I mentioned, into someone's emotions towards investing, into their abilities to tolerate the uncertainty and the volatility. And so if advisors are able to then take that information and we're able to break it down in a way that they can understand how their client may behave or their attitudes, then that can enable them to really help them to make their recommendations, to maybe create different target markets as well, where they can think about the different demographics, think about the risk profiles and sustainability preferences, and then think about the most suitable recommendations for those clients. So I think through the software like we provide, and through the process, and having a structured process that advisors then can use this information about how their clients may behave and use it to inform the solutions that they recommend.
And I've recently become kind of interested in cognitive dissonance and what role it can play, especially for clients' financial choices. So what is that role and how can advisors navigate it?
Yeah, so obviously, if we think about it as being kind of this battle between how our attitudes and how we actually end up behaving, if we see it, and we think about an example in our industry. So, clients wanting to save for the future.
Yes.
And that's their attitude. That's their desire.
That's why they came to you.
Yeah. But then their behavior goes contrary to this in a way that when they suddenly have some additional cash, that they then spend it. And then they ultimately regret that they've spent it. And then there's this discomfort, this feeling as a result of this cognitive dissonance. So I think one of the problems that we have and why we may feel this way is that we focus maybe too much on our attitude. And so when we think about how we behave, our views and our attitudes and our beliefs only plays one only plays one part of that story and how we intend to behave and how we then actually behave, because we're also influenced by others around us, by what others are doing in the moment, how our others' views are on investing and saving. But ultimately, we are also strongly affected by our own beliefs and our abilities to change our behavior. And so if you think about someone wanting to quit smoking, for example, as much as they have this attitude that they want to quit and their families and friends are suggesting it's best for their health, if they don't actually believe in their own abilities to change, then it's very difficult to change your behavior. And then you're going to have this dissonance where you're acting in a way that you don't really feel like you should be. And I think that's the same with investing. It's the same when we think about sustainability as well, that we might have views and attitudes, but then there's these trade-offs we have to think about potentially in the opportunities that we have, in the investment opportunities we have, in our returns potentially. And so again, that's why we have these questionnaires. That's why we have questions to look at these trade-offs, to make people think a bit more about their attitudes, about how they believe companies should behave, and whether that behavior, reflects their own beliefs and their own values, if that's important to them. So in terms of advisors, how can they then help clients navigate this. I think it's about making that, if we think about investing and saving for the future, is making that become more real. It's connecting the client to their future selves more, to encourage them to reduce what we call this psychological distance. So the more that I think, especially for younger generations, the more that I think, if I act like that, it may help future generations, or it may help other people in different countries or people who are not really like me, the less I'm likely to act today. So I need to be able to reduce that distance. And there are ways that, researchers look at reducing it by, for example, writing letters to yourself, visualizing your future self, even using images, where you the apps where you can kind of change your age
yourself up.
Yeah, so you can look at that and spend some time reflecting and visualizing your future self. There's also some apps that have been designed to encourage people, and gamification to encourage people to save, and seeing how that actually has a significant impact on how much people do save in the future. So I think, advisors, part of it could be getting clients to actively think more about their future. Part could be, learning that when they did have this discomfort and when they did act in a way that was contrary to maybe their attitudes, that they should learn from that and take time to reflect on that and realize that, that you make mistakes. We all may make mistakes, but we can, next time we can change that. Next time when we do have some extra cash, we can change that so it maybe is more aligned with our how we want to behave, how we intend to behave. And as I mentioned, the confidence part, the self-efficacy part in my abilities, like believing that I can act in this way, that's something we really also need to help clients build up, as well.
Yeah. That makes me think of something that I saw recently. And I thought about it personally, and then it just kind of made me feel like, oh my God, I'm never going to reach that goal. And it was an article from The Spectator, which basically stated that millennials would need to save $3 million. So this was based in the US, I assume, but I don't think it's that far off people who are in Europe or anywhere else in the world, but they need to save $3 million to live comfortably in their elderly years, or like when they retire. And seeing that number, I have to say, just made me think, well, that's not attainable. So what's the point, basically? Is that something that advisors probably also have to tackle with? How do you tackle it where you can see a number like that seems so unattainable and make it more realistic?
Yeah, exactly. And I think that's potentially why, as you said, the younger generations there may be this advice gap with younger generations, or with certain groups of the UK population who know that they can't achieve that. So maybe they don't even seek advice. And as I mentioned before, people who have more knowledge, who have more confidence, they're the ones who actually, what we find, actually go to financial advisors in the first place. Actually find those who maybe need it don't necessarily go. And so, I think advisors, as I mentioned, using cash flow tools, for example, could be I think is a good way of how they can, you can put in your goals, you can put in your objectives, you can put in when you may retire, and you can get a better visualization of what that may look like, so it doesn't potentially look so scary and unachievable, especially when you're at a younger age. But obviously I think it's a difficult one to tackle, because that's what prevents people maybe even reaching out to an advisor in the first place. So I think there are ways in which we probably need to think about how we work with all generations and all clients, to help with that.
Cutting out the noise. I think now I'm just going to block out certain headlines I might see. So on top of that, I'm sure that to even have conversations where you talk about any behavioral tendencies that your clients might have, or any cognitive dissonance they might have. You have to build trust. So build trust and rapport. So what tips could you provide that will help kind of build that rapport and that trust, where a client can come and say, this is what I keep doing, or I don't know why I have so much anxiety when it comes to this particular topic, when it comes to their finances?
Yeah, I mean, trust is such a big factor. Research shows that trust is more important to clients above the advisor's expertise, above the fees of financial advice. So being able to understand, how you can develop that trust, that relationship, that rapport with the clients is essential. And so there are a few models out there, kind of psychology models looking at building trust, and most of them kind of have the same underlying factors, concepts within them, and that is to, establish your credibility, demonstrate that, it is something that is you are reaching out to an advisor is a useful step for you, and that actually they have the expertise to help you in this situation. But at the same time, you need to not be too focused on yourself and frame the goal in a way that is completely about your client. That you're going to create a plan together, explain that goal, explain it in a way that is understandable for them, because everyone has a different way of learning. Everyone has a different type of style of how they prefer to communicate. So getting them to engage as well and be part of designing those goals and those objectives is really important to help them trust that you're doing this for their benefit. And obviously at that same point in time, giving them evidence to show that how you've done it for others, maybe, or whether that's through stories or whether that's through numbers, through graphs, and being able to share with them and provide evidence that this is something that's important and will benefit them, can help build that. And ultimately, the most important part, as we mentioned, is understanding this emotional connection and having this emotional intelligence to be able to empathize with clients wherever they may be during the investment journey, what may have happened, to be able to use your own emotions to kind of impact how they may be feeling, and be able to help them regulate their emotions when they're struggling. So I think that we know that this role is you have to have very good interpersonal skills and be able to empathize with clients. So I think focusing a lot on that and working on improving your emotional intelligence, how you can perceive emotions in others, how you understand emotions and the complexity between them, and taking time out to reflect when you do have conversations with clients that maybe don't go so well, or that do, and reflect and say, what did I do well this time? Why was the client feeling that way? What was kind of contributing to their emotions and mine? And then, helping that and using that, and that will help you build your relationship and your trust, and help clients to trust you more. And I think that relates a lot to one of the so there's these principles by Cialdini. He mentioned that there's kind of these principles that we can use to influence people and to kind of persuade them. And I think that one of those that's relevant to what I've just been sharing is reciprocity. So the more that I give, the more that I seem interested in you and want to know your objectives and know your goals, the more you're also going to share, and the more we're going to build that trust. And the example that I see this working well with is a GP and their patient. So if the GP wants to know, exactly where's your pain coming from? Why is it happening? How long has this been happening for? Have any of your other family members, how do they feel about this? The more that I'm going to feel, actually, they do want to know my issue. They do want to help me. They are concerned about my welfare. And so I'm going to share more. And it's exactly the same I feel with an advisor and a client. The more you get to know them, want to know, their perception of money, their background, their culture, how this has all influenced their views on money, the more they're going to share with you, and the more that relationship's going to grow and grow.
Yeah, I've been very interested in terms of emotional intelligence and trying to build on my own emotional intelligence, because I feel like it's a very important thing to understand, especially my own reactions when it comes to not just like my personal life, but when it comes to my spending habits, am I spending a little bit more because I feel like I had a bad day and I deserve a treat or something?
Yeah,
It's
yeah.
just being able to catch myself and be like, oh, that's not going along with my long-term goals. So stop it, Kim. Don't do that. But
But
yeah,
it's difficult, right? When you're in the situation, it's difficult
it
to be
is.
able to
It's
take
very
yourself
hard to
out of
catch
that.
yourself.
Yeah.
Especially because the other part, like, it feels like there's two parts of my brain. There's another part of my brain that's saying, save for your future, think about what you want to do next year or in 5 years, 10 years. And then there's the other part that says, but you've had a really hard day and you still deserve this. This is only just this little amount. Don't worry about it,
Yeah.
Um,
And I think, I think this, just having this conversation and being mindful of that is what's also very important, that you then are able to reflect, and then next time, you might do something different, or you might instead realize that I shouldn't be so dissatisfied after I've made my decision. I shouldn't regret it, because of what happened last time. And regret aversion actually is another very important bias that I think, because we may fear the consequences of our actions, what we may do, and we may just end up not making a decision at all. We lose all of that motivation. Something similar with me. I've been looking at spending some money on a new instrument, and I'm looking at all of these options out there. Now I'm just looked at so many choices, so many options. It still happens that I'm now less motivated to maybe even make a choice because I fear making the wrong choice.
Yeah.
And so it's a difficult one. But the problem that can lead to, and I hope it doesn't lead to with me, is that it's inertia, where we just don't do it. We just don't even make a decision. We just decide not to do it. And obviously this can happen with clients, and by deciding not to make a decision, we're still making a decision, and this will still have an impact on our investments, on how we save for the future. So I think it's a big struggle is regret, and having this fear of regret, anticipating this regret because of the decision we're about to make.
Yeah, and there's so many different regrets you could have about any choice you make. So, yeah, it's a whole rabbit hole you could fall down. But you touched on cultural differences, or how culture can affect, the way you spend your money. So, can you go a little bit more into depth about how cultural differences can influence behavioral biases, and how advisors should adapt their approach?
Yeah, so it's an interesting one, because obviously we should think about different cultures and how different people may have different perspectives, but at the same time, we should look at everyone at an individual level as well. Otherwise, we have stereotypes, and we just assume, because someone is from this background, they may be more risk averse, for example. And we've done some recent research looking at across Europe, looking at people's attitudes to risk and their sustainability views. And we find, for example, people in Spain tend to be a bit more risk averse than people in the UK, but at the same time, they're more interested in sustainable products than the UK. But that doesn't mean that when I next speak to a Spanish person, and my wife is Spanish, by the way, that doesn't mean that when I next speak to them, I just suddenly assume that because they're from Spain and they're this client, that they're gonna, be low down on in terms of their risk profile, and they're going to be very interested in sustainability. So I think, we have to think about culture though, and backgrounds, more so because exactly because of that reason, that we should be aware that not everyone is coming in the same. So if we think about what we've been speaking about, saving for the future, some of us, and because of our backgrounds and because what we know about investments and things, we would think it's crazy to not want to save for tomorrow. We would think that's absolutely crazy to not want to do that, knowing, like you said, you might need 3 million after retirement. But then someone from a different upbringing, from a different family background, born in a different year, may think it's completely crazy to not focus and think about spending just for today, because because of how I've been brought up, or because of the way my parents view the banks or the governments and their relationship with money. And so, which, yes, can be at a cultural level, but also at an individual or family level. And so I think the reason why that's important, when you said about advisors adapting, I think they need to be very mindful of that, if someone is a male versus female or certain background, yes, there might be certain ways and they're more likely to behave, or more likely that we see through research that they have behaved in the past, but that I should still get to know that individual. And it's quite interesting, actually, some colleagues of mine thinking about kind of gender as well, as similar to culture, I guess, is they found that when males and females, a couple, completed the attitude to risk questionnaire, that the advisor, the overall risk profile that they went with and that they selected, because you can complete the questionnaire separately as a husband and wife, that they tend to significantly gravitate to the profile more related to the man than the woman. And I can imagine. Just things like this should demonstrate to advisors that there are ways that they need to adapt how they approach the conversation around risk, around your investments, how they should think about each individual and their own background, their own perceptions of money. And as I mentioned earlier as well, certain ethnic minorities have lower levels of financial literacy, financial knowledge, financial self-efficacy in general. So again, they're going to maybe be less inclined to even come to you. And so when they do come to you, you need to be able to adapt and build that trust, as we mentioned. It's difficult, it's complex, because everyone is different and everyone's had a different upbringing, but that's why we need to have these conversations with clients and not just put everyone through the same process and assume that they're going to be exactly the same as someone I saw yesterday.
Because I think different cultural backgrounds can have different ways to deal with money, whether it's, and also the amount of people that they have to think about when they're spending their money. If I think of like my father, for example, when he was raising his own family, he also still had to think about his younger siblings as well, and helping his parents. And also, I can imagine if he'd gone to an advisor and be like, there's, for me, I'm thinking about my retirement and my kids, but also there's 9 other people that I need to think about as well. And it's so layered and so interesting.
It's actually very interesting. Even some cultures even thinking about their parents as part of their own plans. When they retire, and having them live with them or taking care of them. So it's very important that advisors are aware that they need to understand all of the different dynamics that can take place in each family.
Okay. And finally, because I've had a great time talking about this, I love to, pick your brain about the brain. But what advice would you give to financial advisors who want to continue learning about behavioral insights?
Obviously there's lots of books out there. One very good book, great book actually, The Psychology of Money by Morgan Housel, I think is really, really useful and really easy to read. But one thing that I think is could be also interesting for advisors to look at more of the academic work that's out there, some of the experiments, and see ways which they can apply, like I mentioned earlier, things into their practice or things into the software or whatever they're creating. If we're thinking about learning about kind of their own clients, I think there are easy ways where they could, create questionnaires or ways where their clients could give them feedback about what they're doing. They can gather data and be able to use that data to then maybe improve, their processes, or improve how they build relationships with clients, or how their clients feel about the reports they're using or anything like that. As I mentioned earlier, probably one of the best ways is to think about ourselves as advisors, and think about our own biases and probably our own our emotional intelligence, and how we need to maybe work on that and be able to take time to reflect, make sure we're listening and thinking about non-verbal and verbal cues when we're having conversations with clients. And I think these are things advisors could do right now. There's no need to build a questionnaire or run an experiment. You can do that right now and start improving the way that you interact with clients.
Well, I really, really enjoyed this conversation, Louis. Thank you for taking the time out of your day to talk to me.
Thank you. Thanks for having me.
Thank you for listening to In Conversation With. We do hope that you enjoyed it. Please do keep up to date with all our new releases via Podbean, Apple Podcasts, Spotify, and everywhere else you get your podcasts from. You can also keep up to date with all our new content published on the Money Marketing website, as well as our print edition Money Marketing magazine. So make sure to subscribe. Follow us on Twitter, LinkedIn, Facebook, and Instagram. See you next time.